They told Michael not to go down there after midnight, not because of superstition but because of something real, something no one could explain. Yet he didn't believe them. He thought it was just one of those old small-town stories people tell to scare newcomers. So when the clock hit 12, and the house was silent, and the only sound was the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, he decided to prove to himself that he wasn't like them, that he didn't believe in shadows or whispers, that he was a man of reason. But as he stood at the top of those narrow wooden stairs that led down into the basement, he felt something strange, like the air was heavier than before, like it was pressing against his skin. But he forced a laugh and told himself it was just his mind playing tricks. Then he gripped the rusted metal railing and began to descend slowly, one creaking step at a time, the sound echoing through the hollow darkness below. And with every step the darkness seemed to swallow him deeper, until the faint glow of the hallway light behind him felt so far away he could barely see it anymore. And the smell hit him next, a thick, damp odor of earth and something else, something like rust or blood. And for a second he hesitated, gripping the railing tighter, wondering why the basement smelled like that. But curiosity was stronger than fear. So he took another step, and then another, until his foot touched the cold concrete floor. And he was standing in pitch-black silence, except for the soft hum of the old furnace in the corner. And as his eyes adjusted, he saw the shape of the basement around him. Low ceilings with wooden beams, shelves lined with old boxes and jars, and in the center of the room something covered by a dusty gray sheet, tall and human-shaped, standing perfectly still. And that was when he felt the first chill race down his spine, because he didn't remember seeing anything like that when he moved into this house 2 weeks ago. He stared at it for a long moment, his breath slow and shallow, and then he whispered to himself that it was probably just an old piece of furniture, maybe a coat rack or something harmless. But his voice sounded too loud in the stillness, so loud it didn't sound like his anymore. He took a step closer and the floor groaned beneath his weight. And that was when he thought he heard something, so faint he almost convinced himself it wasn't real, a whisper, soft and wet, coming from beneath the sheet. And his body froze completely because it wasn't the kind of sound wood or fabric makes. It sounded like a voice that wasn't his, and it said his name, so quiet like a breath but clear enough for him to hear. And every part of him screamed to run back up the stairs, but his feet didn't move. They stayed rooted to the floor like the cold concrete had grown hands and gripped his ankles. And then the whisper came again, longer this time, like a sigh drawn out through teeth. "Michael, come closer." And his heart slammed against his ribs so hard it hurt. But instead of running, he found himself taking another step forward, as if the voice pulled him like a rope around his neck. And now he could see the shape beneath the sheet more clearly, and it didn't look like furniture anymore. It looked like a person standing there motionless, tall and thin with shoulders slumped forward. And the sheet wasn't just gray, it was stained, dark blotches spreading across the fabric like water but thicker. And before he could stop himself, he reached out with a shaking hand and touched the edge of the sheet. And the moment his fingers brushed the fabric, the entire basement seemed to inhale. The air sucked inward like the room was alive and it was breathing him in. And then the light bulb above his head flickered once, twice, and went out, plunging him into blackness so complete he felt blind. He stumbled backward, his hands searching the air, and in the dark he heard the sheet fall to the floor, soft and slow like something shedding its skin. And then silence, so thick it rang in his ears until he heard footsteps, bare feet on the concrete, one step and then another coming toward him, and he couldn't see a thing, only hear the wet sound of those steps getting closer. And then the whisper again, not soft this time but right next to his ear. "Michael, why did you come down here?" He spun around blindly, his arms thrashing through the air, but there was nothing, only darkness pressing against his eyes, and the smell was stronger now, like copper and rot, so thick he could taste it on his tongue. And then something touched his wrist, light as a feather but cold like ice. and he jerked back and fell against the wall, his breath loud and ragged, his fingers scraping across the rough cement. And he whispered into the dark, "Who's there?" But his voice trembled so much it barely sounded like words. And there was no answer, only the sound of breathing that wasn't his own, slow and steady, coming from somewhere in front of him. And then the footsteps again, this time circling, slow and deliberate. And he knew, with a kind of cold certainty that sank into his bones, that he wasn't alone, and whatever was down here had been waiting for him to come exactly when they told him not to. And he tried to remember where the stairs were, tried to picture them in his mind. But everything felt twisted, like the basement wasn't the same shape anymore, like the walls had shifted in the dark. And then he heard a low sound, not a whisper this time, but something deeper, like a groan dragged out of a throat that hadn't spoken in years. And it came from right in front of him, so close he felt the vibration in his chest, and his hand shot out instinctively, searching for anything, a shelf, a box, something to hold onto, and his fingers brushed something rough and wooden, and he gripped it hard, pulling himself up, his legs trembling so bad they barely held him. And then the light came back, just for a split second, a single flicker, like the bulb above him was trying to live. And in that heartbeat of light he saw it, standing not 3 feet away, tall and thin and naked, its skin gray and slick like something pulled from deep water, its arms too long, hanging almost to the floor, its head tilted to one side like it was studying him, and its mouth, God, its mouth was stretched into a smile so wide it looked like the skin would tear. And then the light died again, and the dark swallowed everything, and Michael screamed, a raw sound that ripped out of his throat and echoed through the basement like a trapped animal. And the footsteps rushed at him fast, too fast. And then something slammed into his chest and knocked him back, and he hit the floor hard, the breath exploding from his lungs. And before he could move, cold fingers wrapped around his ankle and started dragging him across the concrete. And he clawed at the floor, his nails tearing against the rough surface, leaving streaks of blood. And he screamed again, "Stop, stop, stop." But the dark didn't care. The dark kept pulling him deeper. And then his hand hit something sharp, a broken glass jar maybe, and he grabbed it without thinking and swung it back hard. And it hit something solid, and there was a sound, not pain, not a cry, just a wet thud like meat hitting the floor. And the grip on his ankle loosened for a second, just a second, but it was enough for him to twist and scramble to his feet, his chest burning, his breath tearing in and out, and he ran. He didn't know which direction, just ran, his hands outstretched, banging into walls, scraping his skin raw. And then he felt wood under his fingers, the railing, the stairs, thank God. And he lunged upward, taking the steps 2 at a time, his body shaking so hard he thought his bones would snap. And behind him the sound came again, those footsteps pounding against the floor, fast, faster than any human should move. And he didn't dare look back. He just climbed and climbed until he saw the faint glow of the hallway light above, and he reached for it like it was the last thing he'd ever see. And then something grabbed his leg again, yanking him down so hard his chin smashed against the step, stars exploding in his vision. And the voice came, right in his ear, "You should have stayed." And the cold flooded through him like ice water in his veins. And then he felt teeth, not biting, just resting against his skin, right at the back of his neck. And he sobbed, "Please, please let me go." And for a moment everything went still, the grip loosened, the teeth pulled away, and then he was free, his body surging forward on pure instinct. And he threw himself up the last steps and slammed into the hallway, crawling on his hands and knees until he was out of the doorway. And then he turned and kicked the basement door shut with every ounce of strength he had left, the wood shaking under the impact. And he grabbed the old iron latch and slammed it down, locking it tight. And then he collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving, his throat raw from screaming, his body shaking so hard it felt like he was coming apart. And the silence pressed in again, thick and heavy, and he thought maybe it was over, maybe he was safe. But then the sound came, soft at first, just a gentle tap, tap, tap against the other side of the door, like fingers drumming lazily. And then the whisper, muffled but clear from the darkness below, "You can't keep it locked forever, Michael." And he stared at the door, tears streaming down his face. And for the first time in his life, he wished he had believed them, wished he had listened, because now he knew, deep in his bones, that the basement wasn't just a room. It was something else, something alive. And it wanted him. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but it would wait. It would wait until the door opened again, and it would pull him down where no one could hear him scream. And as he sat there shaking, the latch on the door began to move, slow and steady, all by itself. And Michael realized the worst part wasn't what was in the basement. It was the fact that now, a part of him wanted to go back down. Michael sat there with his back pressed against the wall, staring at the basement door like it was the mouth of some enormous beast waiting to swallow him whole. His hands shaking so hard he could barely keep them still. And the sound of the latch moving was slow, deliberate, like a hand was curling around it from the other side and testing it. And then it stopped, the silence crashing down again like a heavy blanket, and Michael didn't breathe, didn't move. Every muscle locked tight as if staying still could make him invisible. And after what felt like forever, he heard a sound that made his stomach turn, a low scraping, like nails dragging down wood, starting at the very top of the door and sliding all the way down to the floor. And it didn't stop. It just kept going, back and forth, slow and steady. And with every stroke of those unseen nails, he felt something inside him unravel. And then it stopped just like that, and the quiet returned. But it wasn't comforting. It was worse. So much worse, because now he didn't know where it was, if it was still behind the door or if it had found another way in. And his mind began to play tricks, making him hear things, soft creaks in the floorboards above, whispers brushing against his ears like spider webs. And he told himself he was imagining it, that it was just shock. But then he smelled it, that same coppery stench seeping through the cracks of the door, thick and warm like breath. And he gagged, covering his mouth with his hand, trying not to make a sound, because some instinct screamed that if it knew where he was, if it could hear him, it would come, and he didn't want to see its face again. That long, gray thing smiling in the dark like it had been waiting for him all along. And he thought about running, grabbing his car keys and getting the hell out of this cursed house. But the keys were in the kitchen, and the kitchen was right past the door to the basement. And he didn't have the courage to walk by it, not when it felt like something was still standing there on the other side, listening, smiling, waiting for the latch to click open. So he stayed, his body pressed so hard against the wall it hurt, his breath shallow and fast, his heart pounding like a drum in his throat. And then he heard it again, that voice, but softer now, like it was drifting up through the cracks in the floorboards, floating around him. "Michael, come back. You didn't finish." And his eyes burned with tears because it sounded almost kind this time, almost gentle, like a mother calling a child inside from the rain. But he knew it wasn't kind. It was hunger wearing kindness like a mask. And he pressed his hands against his ears, but it didn't help. The voice was inside him now, inside his head, whispering things he didn't want to hear, things that made his skin crawl. And then his phone buzzed in his pocket, and he nearly screamed, his hands fumbling for it. And when he saw the screen, his blood turned to ice, because the name flashing there was his own, Michael calling, and the sound of the ring was soft, tinny, but under it he could hear breathing, slow and deep, like the sound of lungs full of water. And he threw the phone across the hall, his chest heaving, and it hit the wall and shattered. And the ringing stopped, leaving only the silence again. And he thought he heard something upstairs then, a door opening, soft footsteps padding across the floor above him. And he whispered to himself over and over, "No, no, 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 no," because he knew he was alone in this house. He knew no one else had a key, and still the footsteps came, slow and heavy, crossing from one room to another. And then the old floorboards groaned as something started down the stairs, one step at a time. And Michael didn't move, didn't breathe. He just stared at the doorway to the hall, waiting for a shadow to stretch across it. And then the steps stopped, halfway down, and the house fell silent again. So silent he could hear the blood rushing in his ears. And then, from the dark at the bottom of the hallway, something moved, not a shape, not a person, just the black itself, rippling like water, and he blinked hard, thinking it was his eyes playing tricks. But then it stretched longer, reaching toward him like a hand, and he scrambled up and ran, his legs moving before his brain could think, his body slamming into walls as he tore through the hall, past the kitchen. And he didn't even look at the basement door as he passed because he could feel it there, feel something standing on the other side, pressing its weight against the wood. And he crashed through the front door so hard the frame splintered, and the cold night air hit his face like a slap. And he ran down the porch steps barefoot into the yard, the grass wet and cold under his feet. And he didn't stop until he reached the edge of the road, his lungs burning, his vision swimming, and he turned back, expecting to see the house dark and silent, but the lights were on now, every single one blazing like fire. And in the upstairs window, the one from his bedroom, he saw a shape standing there, tall and thin, its head tilted the same way. And even from this far, he could see the white glint of its teeth in that horrible grin. And then the lights started going out, one by one, like someone was walking through the house flipping switches, and Michael stumbled backward, his breath tearing in and out. And then he turned and ran down the empty road, not caring where it led, just running. And behind him, the darkness seemed to follow, stretching across the pavement, swallowing the sound of his footsteps. And he didn't stop, not when his legs screamed, not when his lungs felt like they were on fire, because he knew if he stopped, if he even slowed down, it would catch him. And the last thing he would ever see would be that smile closing in. Michael's bare feet pounded the cold asphalt as he ran into the darkness of the empty road, the night swallowing him whole, and he didn't know where he was going, didn't care. All he knew was that he had to get as far from that house as possible. But the road stretched on forever like a black river with no banks, and the only light came from the pale glow of the moon. But even that seemed to dim, as if the darkness was growing thicker behind him, chasing him, crawling along the road like spilled ink. And he could feel it, not on his skin but inside his head, pressing against the walls of his mind like claws scratching to get in. And the voice was still there, whispering his name over and over, Michael, so soft it almost sounded like his own thoughts. And he clutched his ears, but it didn't help. It only made it louder. And then he saw something ahead, a glow in the distance, faint but real. And he pushed his aching legs harder, running toward it until the shape of a building emerged from the dark, an old gas station, its lights flickering weakly like dying fireflies. And for a moment he thought maybe he was saved, maybe someone was there, someone who could help. And he staggered up to the door and slammed his fists against the glass, shouting, "Please, please let me in," and the door creaked open under his weight, and he stumbled inside, collapsing onto the cold tile floor, his breath ragged, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it would break through his ribs. And the place was empty, no attendant, no sound, just the faint hum of the old refrigerator in the corner, and rows of shelves lined with dust and expired cans. And the smell hit him then, not as strong as before but familiar, that coppery tang that made his stomach twist, and his head jerked toward the counter. And that was when he saw it, an old rotary phone sitting there, black and cracked with age, and the receiver was off the hook, swinging slowly back and forth like someone had just set it down. And he froze because from the receiver came a sound, faint but clear, the sound of breathing, long and slow, and then a whisper, his name, drawn out like a lover's sigh. And he staggered back, his legs shaking, and his heel caught on something and he almost fell. And when he looked down, his blood turned to ice, because the floor was wet, a dark slick spreading across the tiles. And he followed it with his eyes to the corner of the room where something was lying, curled on its side, a man, or what was left of one, his skin gray and bloated, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream, and his eyes staring straight at Michael like they'd been waiting for him. And Michael stumbled backward, choking on a scream, and his shoulder hit a rack of snacks and they toppled over with a crash. And the sound seemed to wake something in the air because the lights flickered violently. And then the phone on the counter rang, a shrill, piercing sound that made his head pound, and he backed away from it, his hands clamped over his ears, but the ringing didn't stop. It just kept going, louder and louder, until it felt like the sound was inside his skull. And then it cut off all at once, and the silence that followed was worse. So much worse, because now he could hear it again, that breathing, but this time it wasn't from the phone, it was behind him. And he turned slowly, his heart crawling into his throat, and in the flickering light he saw the doorway where he'd come in. And filling it was that thing, that tall, gray shape with arms too long and a grin that split its face in half. And it ducked its head to step inside, its movements slow and deliberate, like it was savoring the moment. And Michael backed away until his spine hit the wall, his legs giving out beneath him, and he slid to the floor, shaking his head, whispering, "No, no, no." And the thing crouched down, folding those impossible limbs, its face inches from his. And the grin widened until it wasn't a grin anymore, just a gaping wound of teeth. And it whispered, "You ran so far just to come home." And before he could scream, those hands shot out, cold and wet, wrapping around his head, and the lights went out, plunging everything into darkness. And the last thing Michael heard was his own voice, whispering back, "Come closer," like something had crawled inside him and was speaking through his mouth. And then there was nothing, no sound, no breath, only the creak of the gas station sign outside swinging in the wind, and the road stretching empty under the pale, dead moon, waiting for the next traveler who doesn't listen, who finds themselves drawn to the basement no one should enter after midnight.